Okay, we're back again, and want to thank OrchidGarden for a great comment with some good questions regarding Oncidiums, intergenerics, and what to do about them or how to get them into semi-hydro, and how they can be helped to acclimatize or adapt. So I pulled mine out. As you can see from the middle one, I don't have many Oncidiums that I would like because they get so big and space is an issue for me. So my Masai Red there in the middle is doing absolutely insanity in its pot. I have 7 spikes, 3 of which came from one pseudobulb. So we'll cover that one. Then I have a few Twinkles on the left, one that's already in the self-watering semi-hydro leca setup, and one that has yet to be changed over, and I'll explain why. Then I have Peggy, Ruth, Carpenter on the right, which was my first ever Oncidium into semi-hydro, so I'll explain my thought process there. And down here I just have 2 more, which basically, one is the Wildcat variety Golden Star on the right, and the left is a no ID. That was one of those purchases where I need a new orchid and the garden center had a discount table, so I bought it. I didn't know what it was, but it's blooming nicely and it's fragrant, so there's that. Okay, so let me see how I can compile this video so that it makes sense, and if I don't cover an area in such a way that it is easily understood, let me know in the comments below, and I will be very happy to elaborate in a reply. Alright, let's get going. Okay, so to start this off, let me just go with the biggest, start with the biggest and then go to the little ones, because I think maybe it'll make more sense. I don't know. I have dyslexic issues, so maybe the other way around would be better, but let's try it this way. So for me, when it comes to making a decision of when to put a plant into a different media from when I get it home is twofold. The size of the orchid that I bought, especially in Oncidium types, the size of the pseudobulb. So if it's a big orchid with big pseudobulbs, then basically I don't go and adapt, acclimatize or anything. I clean it, do whatever has to be done, and then I just put it in its pot, and yeah, fingers crossed, hope for the best, because obviously not all are the same. But when it comes to the intergenerics and all these hybrids that are out there, they're pretty robust. You may encounter some shriveling as it's trying to figure out what to do next, but literally if the pseudobulbs are big, I find there is a transition phase of 100%. The only difference being, what is it going to do while it transitions? If you want, you can wait for new growth to start, but it always differs as well as to when do new roots start. Some don't start straight away, some start later, some start after blooming. And for me, the first and foremost thing with these big guys is to get as much moisture around them and not ruin or disturb them after that, so that there is, for me, just one time setback. That's it. You only set it back by putting it into its new environment with new media. Okay? If you let it acclimatize, this is my opinion, then it's got acclimatized. And now you're going to take its roots and change over into the new media. It has to acclimatize again. So for me, I just try to, take that one extra step out of the equation, so that it only acclimatizes once. And with the big fleshy bulbs, that is the energy source. And that is why I believe they are more robust and more quick to take to this radical change without acclimatization. So I hope that makes sense. So when it comes to Beallaras or Alicearas or these kind of things, these bulbs, I find, are my indicator. They're big, yes, when they're plumped up and juicy. So, I mean, looking good, right? However, they are more prone to stall and sulk regardless of what you do. even if you put it into the same media it had before, just freshening it up. If bark goes into bark or sphagnum to sphagnum, they will sulk the moment they come from their perfect environment in the greenhouses or nurseries. You bring them home, they bloom, and then you want to change it, they'll sulk regardless of what you do, according to my opinion. So what I did with this one, while it was in spike, I just took it apart, cleaned it up, and threw it into leca, and then of course that's the self-watering with a reservoir down there. So they are thirsty, and because of their sulking, they shouldn't be stood in water, but they like a lot of moisture. So the first couple of times with these fussy ones, again, Beallara, Alicearas, and those, where the pseudobulbs are actually thinner, okay? They might be size-wise big, but they're thin. They don't have the same bulbous storage as what you saw previously in the Colmanara. So in these, when I see that, I think, okay, it needs moisture, humidity, etc. But I can't stand it in water, because if a root down there chooses to branch, I don't want to go killing it. But I do, every second or third day, run fresh water through it. Just two jugs full so that the pot is nicely poured through, and then I put it back into the mask with the self-watering and I leave it. But I do that like every second to third day, just so that there's a constant exchange of oxygen for rejuvenation of cells or build-up with new cells. And eventually, this pseudobulb, I'll just let you know, while I was doing all that, sorry, that's my dog, while I was I've lost my train of thought, but while I was doing the transition into leca, this one actually bent to the point like a C. It became literally an inverted C. It was that bad. But I just kept at it, and eventually I could see it was starting to correct itself again and come back up. So that told me that the roots were doing something. They might have all not been doing everything they should, but something with the old roots was still working because it was starting to absorb the moisture. I'm not going to throw too much feed in there, but seaweed, fresh water, and it's the oxygen exchange, in my opinion, that actually triggers that it's going to be okay, we can do this, we can survive in this new media. So now it is where it is since 2 years, and it's a beast. Recently I repotted it. I haven't decided to split it yet. There's still that old bulb back there, but I wanted to give it another year to gain even more strength before I start knocking off big roots and big chunks of it. So there's that. That is my opinion regarding these, what we consider big bulbs, but they're slender. And I find there's a difference as well. But if you transition, take them, do what you have to do, and then just remember every second or third day, depending on your temperature. All right, if it's in winter, maybe every 5th day, but that oxygen exchange inside the pot is vital. And you can't do that if you just sit it into self-watering. It'll just sit there. All right, that's that one. So the next two that I'm just going to choose, like the middle and intermediate size when it comes to Oncidiums. So here in the Wildcat, we have, this is just a normal one I bought in the garden center, and I didn't even know what it was. It was on the discount table as well. Turns out it was a Wildcat gold red star or something like that. So this one, we can see that the pseudobulbs are small, smaller than the Aliceara that we just saw, the Peggy, Ruth, Carpenter, but they're fat. You've got that chubbiness again. So basically the size, again, there's a lot of storage in there, and it can handle itself. So this one as well, I cleaned it up and I threw it into just leca and just poured water through it. And the first year, I bought it with these full back here, and I'd seen that it was blooming. So these guys are still the old ones. And I leave them on, of course, unless it's a tiny, small, shriveled one, which is going to do absolutely nothing. I left them on, and in this case, I was testing to see if I buried them a little bit deeper, what would they do? Because I read somewhere in an article that when it comes to leca, pebble, semi-hydro, etc., it is okay to take the rhizome down a notch regardless if it's a cattleya or anything, take it down a notch, because then whatever new roots come go straight down into the pot and they don't have to go finding or searching for it. Another thing with the new ones, new Oncidiums, is when they are big like this, is actually when they're in their, what I consider not weakened state, but when they're in their adaptation phase. You see this new growth here. If you remove it, now if this was a new plant that I just got, I would actually, in a couple of days, give this a chance to grow a bit bigger, but then I would remove these 2 leaves because the new roots are coming out from down here. And if it was a weaker plant and just new, I wouldn't want to stress those roots trying to dig through these 2 big fat leaves to get in. So even in this case, I took it, but this time I tried to bury the pseudobulbs contrary to any kind of opinion out there. I buried them a bit and it worked, because this one, you can see the shriveling never really subsided from the back bulb. It plumped up a bit, but it never subsided. So I did that with this one. And on top of that, you can see that the bulb that I grew afterwards got bigger, but there was still some stress left in the plant when it bloomed. However, now it's got 2 new bulbs. This one has already bloomed before. This one is now starting its blooming. So in this case, what I'm going to do is, when it's finished blooming, I'm going to take it out of the pot and I'm going to be really, really radical with the roots. Everything that I find from, let's say, 2/3 back here, I'm going to take it off and then let all the storage that it now has in the back do its work to develop a new root system, so that their area and the gas exchange of oxygen can still occur. All right, so that's one thing as well. In the meantime, if you find that it's a bit too dry, I don't have these this horticultural grit or leca pebbles or whatever, but in some of my pots you will see strands of either microfiber, and I only miss the microfiber, I do not touch the plant, or just strands of sphagnum moss. So depending on what I had available and depending on the season, what I need to stay more humid, and sphagnum moss works better, I just spray that so that there's always something going on humidity-wise. And then if new roots come out, they'll hit the nice soft before they go into this rough leca. So this no ID Oncidium that I bought because I just needed another orchid, I did something a little bit different. I remember back in the past, it was a nasty, nasty time of year. It was like wet and raining. So in this case, I did actually wait for a new growth to come. When that came, I was excited. I got ahead of myself and I promptly transplanted it. And then this Oncidium stalled. And in this case, the reason being, can you see all the residue of the leca on here? I hadn't flushed my leca properly. All right, this is still residue and the orchid hasn't absorbed it at all. But to be honest with you, I'm not going to change the leca out at this point because I can see it's doing fine. I had the first pseudobulbs a little bit more buried in the instance when it started to grow the new growth because of the humidity in the air. So I started to take away some of the leca. I didn't want to compromise the new growth. But you see, it dropped all the leaves. So yes, they're hungry when in growth, but definitely not when they're acclimatizing. It doesn't help. So even though I didn't use fertilizer, the fact that there was so many minerals in the leca, there was enough to make it go, no, I'm not happy here. All right, and that was the only reason. Because once I started doing the same thing, flushing over and over, which I didn't do initially with this orchid because I thought, yeah, it's just a runt, you know, it's one of those €9 ones and you don't know what it is, blah, blah. I didn't do all the flushing through and through. I didn't give it any oxygen exchange. But then I thought, well, you know, you're just being lazy. Don't be like that. And I did exactly what I did with Ruth Carpenter. And suddenly, these bulbs started to plump up. And it not that it created new roots, but the roots inside had something to do, something to absorb. If they couldn't take up minerals, they took up the oxygen, and that was enough to get this one going. And then the new growth took off, which then promptly dropped its leaves because it was too weak to have bloomed. But I was curious to see what it was, so I let it. And these are now the 2 growths from over the winter that have bloomed with 2 spikes each. So this one is solid and on its way. I will also be very brutal with the roots when I come to repot this, because of course it didn't grow in this direction. You know, it's growing towards the back, like, oh, really? So I'm going to have to repot this at some point this year, and I will be radical with this section, but I will not remove the bulbs, and I'll move the orchid back so that it can grow where it's telling me it's growing now. The thing with removing bulbs in the back, unless it's a tiny little one that serves no purpose, when it comes to this, you would think, yeah, I can remove that or that. That triggers the plant then to send out a back growth. It's like cutting a rhizome in a cattleya. So if you want that, great, do it, but then don't plant the pot in the back. Don't plant the plant towards the back, because I believe that you've triggered it to now say, oh my goodness, my back end, there's a problem, I need to send out a new growth, just like with cattleyas. In this case, if you've done that, if you've removed some substantial storage structures, then put it in the middle and you'll see, for me, 80% of the time, something will grow out from the back. I have yet to prove that. It's just a case that I believe would happen, but I'm going to do it with this one when the time comes, and I hope that I remember to document it. So that's my theory there, all right? Keep the leca. When you have leca, I boil mine to sterilize it, and I soak it, I leave it in a bucket of RO water, covered all the time. And initially I change the RO water out every week or so to reduce the mineral buildup the leca has. And I didn't do that with this. And this is the result, what you can see here. And it won't go away unless I pick it out. Okay? Right, so now let's look at my twinkles. I've never had twinkles before. I only bought these late last year when my garden center that only holds Phalaenopsis orchids. I saw twinkles and I went like, yes! So I took all 3 colors. So here the twinkles, they're just brand new in my collection. And this is good timing because I'm going to show you why, as per OrchidGarden, the question was, why, when do you transition and do I acclimatize? So this is the Twinkle Red Fantasy, and it was already repotted a few months ago, and you can see all the little new growths. It's just going to go nuts, which is awesome. All right, let me just show you this one, Twinkle White Fantasy, and you can see, I hope, you know, my editing and processing is so bad. I'm scared to even move. Let me take the tag out. You can see that there's a new growth starting on the back right there and on the left here. You can see that the pseudobulbs are not as good as its counterpart here. And that is not because it's in this pot and this is already transitioned. That is because this plant is weaker already. So when I see that a pseudobulb or pseudobulbs in a pot are in fact already struggling and there is no new growth coming, that is when I don't repot. Because that's not going to help any at all. That's just going to tell the plant, okay, whatever. I'm not an expert on twinkles. Maybe they're robust enough to just take off regardless what you do with them. But in this case, I have not done this because it's already in a bad way as it is. And it's very wobbly in its pot. So I'm going to leave it. Sometimes I put some water through just with seaweed. And then when I first got it, I soaked it in seaweed and CalMag, which I do with all of them, but with any genera that comes into my home. And then I just let them dry out before I start, you know, the transitioning process. But because this one is so weak, I'm loath to move it until I see a little bit more confidence in those growths. Because if it's gonna go, it's gonna go, whether it's in leca or there. But then at least I know that I've given it its best chance. You put it in leca too soon, it's just gonna be too weak to do anything, even with these new growths starting, because look at how thin those pseudobulbs are. Twinkle pseudobulbs aren't big. There's a little bit more caution in how to handle these. Look at how thin they are. This might be a little bit wrinkled, but it's not a fat pseudobulb per se. This one's not wrinkled, and it is paper thin. All right? So when it comes, the smaller the pseudobulbs get, the more cautious I become as to when I move it, why, and how, and into what, okay? So this one is in leca only. All of mine are in leca only. I don't mix ceramis. The reservoir and their roots become so wild, they can take care of it. I don't need to waste my precious ceramis on putting them in there, all right? But I hope that this answers the questions as to why I'm doing it when I'm doing it. The pseudobulbs give me an indicator how radical can I be with the orchid, the Oncidium that I'm dealing with. The bigger, the more storage, they'll be fine. The thinner, and also the texture is more translucent, gives me an indicator it's more vulnerable. Careful. And then I practiced or tested the theory about burying the pseudobulbs, sending them, a little bit like 1.5 centimeters lower than the media, just to see if that theory holds true. It works for my cattleyas. In some, I had the courage to do that, and it worked perfectly. There was no rotting when new growths came out the bottom. There was no problem whatsoever because of that dry layer. And the same works for Oncidiums. If you lower them a little bit, the dry layer on top, unless you're using pebbles, etc., that will create a boundary towards the rot issues that people might consider having. So that is not the case in any of these cases, okay? And then this little one, I'll be watching it and seeing what it does, and letting those little ones develop in this pot until I see a little bit more movement on the root front. So I don't know if I was just yapping away or talking in circles. I hope that you would just leave me a comment if that was of any help to you at all, what my observations are and my reasoning behind what I do and when I do it. And if there's any more questions that arise after this video, then my goodness, just please feel free to write a comment, let me know, and I'll be glad to help. Okay, so from Masai Red and myself, I wish you a wonderful day, and thank you so much for watching. Take care. Bye bye.